Iron Man has teamed up with Emma Frost to take down Fei Long. Welcome to the Comicstorian Complete Story series, where we take trade paperbacks and single issues and we break them down into digestible bites to help you understand. Then we read them dramatically back to you. All alterations to the panels, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. This is Invincible Iron Man issues 10, 11, and 12, which takes place during the Fall of X event. Fei Long is using the Stark Sentinels to hunt mutants, and Tony is teaming up with Emma Frost to stop them. Benny recorded this earlier this year for members, but now it's time for everyone to enjoy. This is Invincible Iron Man.
Tony and Emma have set their plan up, and part of the deal is that Fisk will protect Rhodey in prison. As he steps into the yard, Rhodey is handed a cell phone. "Hold for Tony Stark," the voice says over the line, and Rhodey breathes a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, over at the Hellfire Club, Tony is drinking and having a good time, telling jokes and making everyone laugh. He's playing the role of the playboy very well, keeping himself nice and hidden from Fei Long. One of the waiters comes by handing him a phone, and Tony takes it with a smile. "I was Iron Man. Hello?" "Well, at least it sounds like one of us is having a good time," Rhodey says with a sigh. Tony is shocked to hear his friend's voice explaining that he is working on several things to get him out of there. Rhodey thanks his friend and asks why he called, but Tony is confused. "You called me, Rhodey, right?" Tony asks, and Rhodey looks up, realizing that the other prisoners have surrounded him. I gotta go, Tony," Rhodey says. Tony looks up at the party and realizes that Fei Long has arrived and is calling his name, which means that the villain set this all up and wanted Tony to hear his friend get murdered. Tony puts down the fun as Rhodey gets into his brawl. Tony heads across the floor, meaning to throw away their whole plan to attack Fei Long at that moment, but he's stopped as Wilson Fisk steps in his path. "A word, Mr. Stark. The arrangements you commissioned for me were implemented in the prison several days ago," Wilson Fisk explains. Meanwhile, at the prison, Rhodey is fighting for his life, but a punch knocks him back as somebody steps forward with a knife. The yard suddenly is a swirl of a sandstorm, a massive sand fist rising up, knocking the attacking prisoners away, and the living laser steps forward, breaking the hand of the knife wielder. The living laser helps Rhodey to his feet, while Flint Marco takes his human form. "Our employer hired us to make sure nothing happened to you until you get out," Arthur explains as the fight ends, and Rhodey looks at them in shock. "I'm grateful that you're here, but I didn't know Tony had it in him to hire you and Sandman." Living Laser laughs. "That's rich. Unlike Tony, who I hear is on his ass, he couldn't afford my day rate, let alone an open-ended gig inside of Satan's ass of a prison." Rhodey holds up the phone at hearing Tony's voice again. "Thank God you're alive, Rhodey." He explains that he is still working on getting Rhodey out before hanging up the phone. Now, Tony and Wilson Fisk lean against the bar, with Wilson admonishing Tony for his actions. "Don't make me protect my investment in you again. Now, are we sure we need Fei Long alive?" Fisk asks, and Tony nods as he glances across the room. "Until I get what I need out of his head, yeah. But there's going to be a line to kill him. My assistant Hazel has already called dibs," Tony says, glancing up, seeing Hazel Kendall storming across the room towards the smiling Fei Long. Tony intercepts her quickly, pulling her into the back room. "Unhand me, Tony!" Emma hisses, ordering him to step aside so that she can kill Fei Long this instant. Tony tries to stop her, once again explaining that they need to get the information out of his head first, but she pulls off the side-dampening ring, dropping it to the floor. "You're gonna bring the Sentinels to her door!" Tony snaps at her, and she glares at him. "Out of my way or I'll make you!" And Tony smiles for a moment. "You wouldn't dare touch me," he tells her, but Emma moves fast, stepping forward, kneeing him in the groin. Tony collapses as Emma steps around him. "If you're not suited up and ready to fight, then you best be running. In 30 seconds, he'll be brain dead, and in a minute, the first Sentinel will be here," Emma Frost tells him as she prepares to leave, but Tony gasps, reaching for the siren, explaining that killing Fei Long won't stop the Sentinels or Orcus. "You promised me you'd do this my way, the right way, I'm begging you. Let me have a little more time. Put this ring back on," he gasps as he holds it up. Suddenly, the door swings open to reveal Fei Long, his eyes wide in shock as he sees Tony on his knee with a ring in front of Hazel. "What the hell are you doing, Stark? Marrying the help?" Fei Long says with a smile. Emma and Tony stare at each other, their minds linked without the ring, discussing how bad of an idea this really is. Finally, she relents, holding out her hand. But every breath that he draws is an insult. We'll get what you need and finish this quickly. I dream of avenging them all, Emma thinks before Tony slips the ring onto her finger. Finally, he stands, and to sell the whole new lie of their wedding to Fei Long, they kiss. Enjoy the first and last time that you may touch me, Emma whispers as Tony pulls her in close. Back at the party, Tony continues to sell the lie of having fallen from grace, and with a drink in his hand, he goes to Fei Long, thanking him for taking him out of the Iron Man game. Retirement suits me. I just needed a push, I guess, Tony says as he fakes sipping from his drink. Fei Long smiles and asks Tony where Emma went in his armor the day that the Sentinels attacked them, because nobody has seen Emma Frost since. I thought that'd be obvious. She went to Mars. Before I took a blowtorch to the Mark 70, the black box said that it had been to our moon and then Mars via a teleport of some kind. If I were you, I'd be worried that the mutants are going to reboot Mars attacks, Tony says, a worried look crossing Fei Long's face as Tony turns and walks away. He pulls Hazel into him and stands before the other members of the club, informing them all of their impending nuptials. He then turns back to Emma with a smile. Pack your things, we're leaving tonight for Vegas, he says with joy. And as the two heroes travel to sell the lie, whining and dining their way through Vegas as if they're celebrating an engagement, Tony begins to use the nil armor to break into another Stark warehouse and steal a device that builds other machines. He trusted the device to be smuggled away by Deadpool. I'll get whatever this is back to the Morlock tunnels for you, but maybe I could stay for your big day? I was married once, Deadpool offers, hiding behind a fake mustache that he's currently wearing over his mask. Leave, Deadpool. Iron Man sighs. The next day, Tony joins Emma at the 24-hour chapel, shocked by how beautiful she looks. You look surprised, she says as she stands before the altar. I'm wondering if one or both of us were going to get cold feet. He says as he walks towards her. You look wonderful, he tells her quietly, and they both look up as the doors open to reveal Fei Long. I know you said this is a private affair, but I just couldn't help myself, he says with a smile as he comes in sitting down. As the priest comes in and begins the ceremony, Emma leans towards Tony. He'll have psychic defenses, so stay close. She reaches down, pulling off the ring, immediately bringing them all into her mind. But Fei Long doesn't realize what is happening, and the two journey into his memories. Tony can see what Fei Long learned from Howard Stark's recordings. He listens as his father explains the other dimensional metal that he discovered and leaves his parting words for his son. But it doesn't take long for Fei Long to realize what is actually happening. The memory version of himself stands up, attacking Tony, throwing him to the ground. You and that witch! Hiding in plain sight! Do you take me for a fool? Fei Long demands. But Emma is suddenly behind him, placing her hands into his head, dropping him into a stupor. Relax, Fei Long. You will never remember this encounter. And when you think of the preposterous notion that Hazel and Emma Frost are the same person, you'll get a splitting headache and think no more of it. Emma then looks at Tony as Fei Long settles into his chair. We should conclude our business, Tony. But before we go, I want a deep dive. Who is this small man and why does he hate us? Emma ponders and reaches further into Fei Long's mind. As the images begin to appear, both Emma and Tony are shocked to learn that Fei Long's parents were both mutants and he was born without powers. Both of his parents loved him and the story that they abandoned him is completely made up. He hated them for what he was not, Tony says quietly. And he looks to Emma, explaining that he has everything he needs from Fei Long, including the schematics of the Sentinels and the information from his father. His fate is in your hands. It's your call. If you do it, just make it look like he had a stroke. Tony tells her. Emma stares down at the images of Fei Long and finally shakes her head. No. The world needs to know the truth. He gets a stay of execution. They both turn away and a portal out of Fei Long's mind opens up. He'll remember nothing. Back in the real world, Fei Long smiles, unaware that anything has happened in his mind as Tony leans down kissing his bride. After the ceremony, Fei Long goes up to the new couple. I want you to consider joining the ranks of Orcus, Tony, as a way that you could save face, regain your role in your old company. After your honeymoon, of course. Fei Long suggests, and Tony shakes his head. I'll see you back at the Hellfire Club whenever we get back. Tony calls to him, and he and Emma walk out. As the pair drive away, Emma explains that the extra-dimensional metal that his father was talking about sounds like Mysterium, the metal that can be found in the White Haunt Room, a sort of purgatory where people who once hosted the Phoenix go when they die. She glances back at Tony as they speed through the streets of Las Vegas. Your father clearly nosed onto it, and I suspect that he never got his hands on any. It's a metal that is only available to be mined by the mutants from outside of space and time. We were using it as a soft power after terraforming Araco. She explains as she holds up her X necklace for him to look at. How much of it is there? Tony asks as he takes the gleaming metal and looks at it. If we could get off-world, I could get you as much as you need, Emma says, asking Tony how much Mysterium he would actually need, and he stares at the necklace for a moment. All of it. To sell the lie of their marriage, Tony and Emma traveled to Hawaii to spend their honeymoon, making sure that many pictures were taken and many people saw them having a great time. But when no one was looking, Tony took the nil stealth armor and left. They chose Hawaii for the fact that it was close to the island of Krakoa, with Emma watching from the hotel through Tony's eyes. Tony slipped quietly into the dead island. Using his stealth armor, he slipped past the Sentinel watchman, Emma watching through the sunglasses tied to Tony's armor as Tony makes his way to the Hellfire Bay and into the former house of the White Queen. I took possession of a modest amount of Mysterium that was meant to be turned into gifts by Forge. If it hasn't been found or confiscated yet, it will be in the larger of the walk-in closets. Emma explains, Tony nodding as he slips into the White Palace, informing Emma that Orcus has invaded her home. He looks at the soldiers, but is surprised to see that they have a smart gorilla with them. You two wait here. We lost too many operatives to let our guards down. Oh my god. There are Orcus apes? Tony says over the radio. Indeed there are, darling, and don't underestimate them. My understanding is that they are equipped with PhDs. Emma explains as she continues to sip champagne and dine on shrimp in their hotel bed. Tony slips into Emma's bedroom and begins to look for Emma's trunk. Anthony, are you sure you're invisible to intelligent apes? Emma says nonchalantly. Tony scoffs at the notion. Even if it's the world's most intelligent ape, it's still up against, Tony begins to state, but the ape has rushed behind him, slamming him hard, sending him into the wall, chipping away at the white diamond. Fei Long tuned our satellites to find a new element, which brought me here. I didn't expect you. Where is the White Queen, Iron Man? The ape demands. Tony struggles to his feet, firing a blast at the ape. Sorry, who? I just saw the signs for an estate sale. Tony jokes as he brushes Emma's bra off of his armor. The ape dodges the blast, rushing forward, slamming into Tony again. Fei Long will be so distressed that his pet CEO has been lying and still wears a suit of armor. The ape says, grabbing Tony, lifting him into a bear hug. I did tell you that this would be a disaster, Emma says as she sips her glass of champagne. I know! Tony sighs as he hits the ape with a blast from his chest cannon, sending it across the room. He launches forward again, slamming into the monster, sending it into another wall. A final blast of his energy beams, bringing the wall down around the creature, burying it. With the fight over, Tony checks Emma's trunk and finds the metal waiting for him. But as he prepares to lift and leave, he pauses as he sees a photo album on the ground. Emma, I found something you might want. He reaches forward, but Emma shakes her head as she sees it through his eyes. She pulls the glasses off, looking at the hotel room. Leave it. It's physical evidence that I don't need back at the Hellfire Club. Perhaps it belongs with the other rubble. Tony nods, lifting the trunk onto his shoulders. If there's nothing else, I think these glasses have given me a migraine, Emma says, and Tony understands as he slips back out of the White Palace. Sign off. I'll see you soon. And soon the pair return to the Hellfire Club, where Tony begins his work. After he turns the metal into a rod, he begins to test it. First, he brings it to Captain Marvel. She's unable to bend it. Next, he brings it to Stephen Strange, who can do nothing against it with his magic. Finally, he goes to Spider-Man, explaining to the wall crawler that he needs his help with a scientific experiment. I'd love to! Spider-Man says enthusiastically, pointing out that everyone forgets that he has a scientific background and how smart he is. No one ever thinks of me as a science hero. What do I need to do? Spidey asks, and Tony asks the wall crawler to close his eyes and proceeds to crack him in the leg with the rod. Ow, what the hell, dude? Spider-Man shouts as he hops up and down, when suddenly he turns to Tony. Wait a second, my spider sense didn't see that coming. What the heck is that? Spider-Man asks, and Tony looks at the rod in his hand. It's a weapon, he says softly. The pair look over the city, watching as several Sentinels fly by on patrol. You're gonna hit those Sentinels in the shin with that thing? Spider-Man asks, and Tony nods. As a matter of fact, yeah, that's exactly my plan. Meanwhile, at Fort Bend County Courthouse, She-Hulk is defending Rhodes, pointing out that the phone records of the man who died state that he wasn't at the Sentinel warehouse when Rhodey and Tony blew it up, meaning that he had to be killed elsewhere at the time of the explosion, meaning that he must have been killed elsewhere. The prosecutor turns to She-Hulk and the judge, pointing out that just because the man's cell phone wasn't there at the time doesn't mean that he wasn't. We ask that Mr. Rhodes be confined until the jury decides what is true and what is not. The prosecutor says. Outside, Jennifer stalks towards her rental car. With a growl of frustration, she slams her fist into it, crumpling it in one blow, before picking it up and throwing it across the parking lot. She turns to find a sheriff staring at her in shock. It was my rental car and I checked the box for extra insurance. Meanwhile, at the Hellfire Club, Tony journeys down into his secret lab beneath the club to find Wilson Fisk waiting for him, admiring the Mysterium rod that he has created. To what do I owe the pleasure, Mr. Fisk? Tony asks, and Fisk looks at him, explaining that he is checking in on his investment and asks that he hurries up. Time is something you can't afford, Mr. Stark, because I can't purchase it for you. You are being funded and protected by me so that you can reunite me with my wife. My patience is wearing thin. Meanwhile, at the entrance to the club, Hazel answers the door to find Riri Williams. I'm here to see Tony Stark, Riri explains, but Hazel waves her off. I'm sorry, but he's not here and he's not seeing fans at the moment. But Riri isn't willing to take no for an answer, using her 10 rings of the Mandarin to try and make Hazel forget ever seeing her. But this merely triggers Emma Frost's psychic defenses, and when Riri looks around, they're in a different landscape in Emma's mind. No longer in disguise, Emma smiles at Riri. I'm sorry we got off to the wrong foot, which is about to get planted somewhere unpleasant, Emma says, and Riri looks at her in surprise. Oh crap, Tony Stark married Emma Frost? Does Tony know that he married Emma Frost? Riri says as she prepares to fight. But Emma looks at the 10 rings of the Mandarin in disgust, noting that Riri doesn't have any natural psychic abilities. To answer your question, of course, Tony knows, and you should know that barging into the wrong mind is bad for your health, Emma says as she punches Riri hard enough to knock her away. Riri channels the rings and is suddenly in her armor and leaping back at Emma. The two trade blows back and forth in the mindscape while standing perfectly still in the real world, which is exactly where Tony and Wilson Fisk find them. It appears the women are lost in thought. Tony rushes forward, grabbing the psi blocker ring that Emma holds, knowing that without it, the Sentinels will be there at any moment. Almost as if on cue, one of the massive robots lands in front of the club. Emma Frost detected! Surrender or be liquidated! The robot declares. In the mindscape, Riri and Emma are still fighting it out. While Riri hits the White Queen hard enough to knock her out of the mindscape, the two heroes then look up in shock as the Sentinel approaches. I'm jamming it, but it's less than a minute before we're burned, and everything is up on that Orcus satellite. Tony shouts to his friends, and with a nod, Emma transforms into her diamond form, looking at Riri. Throw me, she orders, and Riri nods. With pleasure. In moments, Diamond Emma is sailing through the air, striking the Sentinel and cracking its armor. I've hated hiding, and if this is how it ends, so be it! Emma Frost snarls, but Tony Stark is there blasting a laser into the cracked armor. Nothing is ending. We have too many people to avenge to die tonight. But the weapons on the stealth armor aren't enough to destroy the Sentinel. Luckily, Riri has brought the special delivery that Tony asked her for, which is why she was there. Flying up, she raises her arm cannon and blasts the Sentinel with PIM particles, shrinking it down. Now a much smaller robot looks up at the two women that surround it. Mutant detected! Emma Frost surrender! The robot calls in its much tinier voice. The two women merely stomp on it until the robot is no longer active. Nice workout, Tony notes as he blasts the remains into dust. He glances back at Emma. Mrs. Stark, if you wouldn't mind getting that inhibitor ring on. At that moment, the police and the EMTs arrive, and Fisk distracts them, explaining that he was the target of a mutant assassination by Mystique. Tony watches from inside the club, smiling. Fisk is eating this up. He then leads Riri downstairs to his lab where he shows her what he's been working on. The design work is impeccable, Riri says, looking over the schematics that he's showing her. Yeah, I know. Can you build these ships? He asks, explaining to her that everything hinges on her being able to build them. She ponders it for a moment before nodding. I'll get the job done. Tony thanks her, explaining that she'll have to go a little farther off-world than she thought. And when you get there, ask for Etri. Tony tells her. Riri nods, heading out the door, but stops for a moment. Why did you need the PIM particles? Tony smiles and motions to his table. Take a look. Riri leans over the table, looking through the microscope, and smiles at what she sees. Oh my god, it's so cute! She looks back at Tony, telling him that she's gonna leave tonight, but he suggests that she stay another day. Tomorrow's Thanksgiving, he reminds her. The next day, the heroes all gather around the table, enjoying food, drink, and each other's company as much as they can in these times. Though Tony and Emma both promise at the end of Orcus, Fei Long, and Dr. Stasis are all fast approaching. He holds up his glass, toasting to those who are no longer with them. They will be avenged, Emma Frost finishes. Meanwhile, back in the prison, a guard walks up to Rhodey holding out a necklace. Your lawyer sent this over to the warden and he approved it, the guard says, explaining that it's the St. Leonard medal, the patron saint of prisoners. Rhodey looks down at the medal in his hands, and as he holds it up, he gets a closer look and smiles. Actually, I think it's a St. Anthony medal, Rhodey says with a smile as he puts the medal on. The small War Machine armor shrunk down by Pym particles, looking out across the world.
And that was Invincible Iron Man issues 10, 11, and 12. What did you guys think of this one? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Rest in peace, man.